Good afternoon, class. I hope you all are doing so well today and staying safe with this really windy, stormy, rainy weather that's going on. So let's go ahead and get started for this week. One of the things that are due that I wanted to start off with are your midterm comments. So you, as the student, will first need to submit your midterm comments into Vera, the learning plan. Then your supervisor slash field instructor will be able to upload their comments in their section. So this is one of the things that are due. We'll go through what else is due at the end of this PowerPoint. This slide just indicates that you as the student will need to go ahead and submit your comments first, and then your field instructor will be able to submit their comments next. Let's take a dive into Unit 4, Week 12. We're going to discuss professional development today and what that looks like for you as a student. If you turn your textbook to page 154, you will read the reflection question. 7.4 states, now that you have had a chance to resolve an ethical dilemma, you will recall that Madison states that the person, you, is an important factor in the ethical decision-making process. What have you learned about yourself as an ethical decision maker, and how did that translate into how you resolved your dilemma? So take a look to the right here as I have some questions for you guys to reflect on about all that went into your decision-making process. Many of you relied on the supervision, maybe some coworkers, staff that are at your agency to give you some more helpful tips to help you best answer the questions for the individual or program that you were working with. Let's take a look. How do cultural, social, and economic factors influence the ethical decision? How do power dynamics and privilege play a role in the ethical decision? Am I aware of my own bias and privilege? What ethical principles and values guide my decision-making process in the situation? How can I promote equity, justice, and inclusivity within my agency placement? Have I explored all the potential risks and benefits? How does my decision align with the mission and values of the agency? Think about these things. Again, we'll start class next week with this discussion for you to get your full points. Let's discuss competency 1 and what this means as a social worker. It's important to always keep that code of ethics in your guidebook, keeping that handy, keeping it close, whether that's in your backpack, in your purse, whether you have a PDF available on your laptop. That is what we use to guide our decision making when it comes to hard decisions that we have to make. It has topics, different categories, whether it's boundaries, confidentiality, advocacy, whatever that looks like and what you're trying to do for your client. This is going to give you a great guideline to help make those next steps and make those decisions. So we have to keep in mind respect for the client, always remembering that we're promoting clients' right to self-determination. They should always be involved in their decision-making process. Also, confidentiality. So safeguarding the privacy and confidentiality of client information. That's our duty. Usually social workers have a locked space or a area, maybe it's a file cabinet with the key, to ensure that no documentation is going to be released, that it is always in a safe place for clients. If you use something on technology, on your laptop, computer, you will also have the opportunity to put a password in, right? Making sure that your computer is not available in public for others to read this confidential information of your client. Professional boundaries, so maintaining appropriate boundaries with relationships, making sure that you're never putting your client at harm. You're always looking for the best interest of the client. That's something that's really important to keep in mind when it comes to any of these steps that you're taking. What is the best interest of the client at hand? Cultural competence. Making sure that you're demonstrating sensitivity and respect for the culture. There's many different diverse cultures and different diverse clients and communities that you are working with. So keeping that in mind, how am I ensuring that I'm remaining culturally competent? Well, maybe that looks like CEUs, right? Making sure that you're maintaining competence in your continuing education, ensuring that you are going to ongoing trainings, ongoing education opportunities, maybe supervision, you're taking an extra lesson or lecture to understand how to better work in a particular area, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's counseling, whether it's different population you may not have worked with. That is something that is expected of you as a social worker. Advocacy is next. So making sure that you understand what it means to be an advocate when it comes to promoting for human rights, ensuring that social justice is being served, and also for empowering vulnerable and marginalized populations. It sounds easier said than done, right? There are steps that we have to take to ensure that we're not harming the client when this happens, right? There are times when we want to encourage the client to speak for themselves on behalf of what we're advocating for or they're advocating for, or maybe it's our job and our duty to take the extra leap and to advocate on behalf of them. So keeping that in mind, integrity and honesty, that is something that, as your personal character, right? Within your personality, you should be conducting yourself with honesty, right? Integrity, being transparent, in any professional interaction that you're participating in. Collaboration and interdisciplinary practice. So, this means exactly what you guys have been doing, right? Ensuring that you're leaning on your coworkers, your supervisor, people that you're working with to ensure that you're making the best decision. You have others in mind that you're seeking support from before making that decision on your own. And lastly is professional development, which of course is what we are working on, what we're going to talk most about today. So that is that reflective practice, right? Making sure that you are doing your own self-assessment or self-reflection. Maybe you are working with your supervisor to ensure that you're getting professionally developed and growing in the task that you guys are doing. That's the biggest thing that's important. And of course, when it comes to handling conflicts, ensuring that you are remaining professional by leaning on all these different things that I just shared. So keep that in mind as you guys remain professional in this competency. All right, class. So please take a look in Blackboard in the discussions tab. As you will see, there are different ethical dilemmas that you guys will have to comment on. There are 5 ethical dilemmas listed, which we will go through. You are responsible for answering three of the 5. In addition to answering those 3, you will also be responsible for responding to 2 of your peers. The case studies provide opportunities for you to explore ethical dilemmas. These are things that will probably be, commonly encountered if you were at your agency, or if you were a working professional for, a couple years in your field, you may encounter some of these things. I want to know detailed information about how you would respond to the issue at hand. What ethical principles are you referencing? Is the code of ethics something you're referencing? I want to hear everything, and I want to know why you're making that decision. And no judgment. I want you to be honest and thoughtful, as we're going to kind of go through each of those scenarios to kind of think about some possible solutions we might want to use. Confidentiality and informed consent. A social worker is counseling a teenage client who reveals that they are struggling with substance abuse. A client requests that the social worker not share this information with the parents, citing concerns about the trust and privacy. The social worker must navigate the tension between respecting the client's confidentiality and ensuring their safety and well-being, as well as complying with legal and ethical obligations regarding informed consent and mandated reporting. So, as you read this, what sits in your gut? What makes you feel uncomfortable as a social worker? Usually that feeling, that gut feeling, is what needs to be addressed. So I'm going to give you guys a hint here, and it's the very first sentence. A social worker is counseling a teenage client who reveals that they are struggling with substance abuse. So just in that one sentence, it provides so much information. It lets us know that we are a social worker working in a counseling setting with a teenage client, which means that they are most likely still under the guardianship of their parents. As we kind of get a little information as we continue to read, we see that. And it also shares that there's substance abuse issue. So that being said, as you look at your NASW Code of Ethics, and I've given you a hint here as I've bolded confidentiality and informed consent, what next steps should you take? Document those ideas in the discussion board, and let's see what we come up with. Let's take a look at what the NASW Code of Ethics provides guidelines for regarding confidentiality and informed consent. Social workers should inform clients about the limits of confidentiality, including circumstances where disclosure may be required, such as suspected child abuse or neglect, harm to self or others, or court-ordered disclosure. Social workers should obtain informed consent from clients before disclosing confidential information to third parties, except in situations where there is legal or ethical obligation to disclose without client consent. Social workers may disclose confidential information without client consent in limited circumstances, such as when required by law, court order, or when necessary to prevent a serious harm. Social workers should take reasonable precautions to minimize the risks of unintended disclosure, share the information on a need-to-know basis. Boundary violations. A social worker is providing therapy to a client who expresses romantic feelings towards them. The client insists on pursuing a personal relationship outside of the therapeutic setting. The social worker must uphold professional boundaries, avoid dual relationships, and prioritize the client's best interest while addressing the client's feelings in a respectful and therapeutic manner. What doesn't sit quite right in your gut? What is wrong about this? And what needs to be first confronted or carefronted? So what would you do? Write your answer in the discussion tab in Blackboard. The NASW Code of Ethics does address the importance of maintaining professional boundaries to ensure ethical practice and to, of course, protect clients from harm. Here are a couple things to keep in mind. Social workers should avoid dual or multiple relationships with clients that could impair their professional judgment or exploit the client's trust and dependency. Dual relationships may include social, financial, or personal relationships outside of the professional context. Social workers are prohibited from engaging in sexual relationships with current clients, supervisees, or individuals who are receiving services indirectly through a family member. Sexual relationships with former clients are also discouraged, particularly if there is a risk of exploitation or harm. It also goes into what professional judgment may look like. Of course, maintaining professional boundaries, making sure that physical boundaries are also being taken into consideration when you are in that predicament with a client. If they ask for a hug, for example, just being mindful of what that looks like. If I think you should know the context of that, right? If it's something that they're seeking for an appropriate reason, of course you can decline. But if it's in a time or a moment of care, maybe to provide a hug as comfort, use your own disclosure. Emotional boundaries, so making sure that maintain appropriate boundaries when it comes to not over involvement so that they're dependent on you in their personal life, but maintaining that there's clear set standards of when to contact you and what that looks like when they do see you. So keeping these things in mind will definitely give you a better idea as to best answer the boundary violations ethical issue. Cultural competence. A social worker is assigned to work with a client from a different cultural background who holds beliefs and practices that are unfamiliar or contrary to the social worker's own cultural norms. The social worker must recognize and respect cultural differences, avoid imposing their own values on a client, and provide culturally competent and sensitive services that honor the client's worldview and identity. So in this scenario, what should the social worker do next, right? They are presented with a client from a different background that they don't know much about. And also, it sounds as if there are different practices, right? Different beliefs that both the social worker and the client may hold. So in this situation, how would you proceed next? what would you do next? Consider consulting with your supervisor, consider research, but thinking about, you being in this moment with the client as they're presenting this information to you, how would you proceed and support them next? The NASW Code of Ethics does emphasize the importance of cultural competence and what this looks like in practice. It's important to keep in mind that you should always apply cultural competence principles in all aspects of your work, including assessment, intervention, evaluation. As you go through the stages of change, you should always be revisiting cultural competence. Many of you guys did this in your case study presentations, revisiting cultural competence and what that looks like when working with your client. Of course, respect for diversity, making sure that you value, right, the unique cultural identities and backgrounds, experiences, even perspectives of clients. So understanding that it's important to the client, right? It shapes their lives, it shapes their identity and who they are. And being very aware and sensitive to what's going on in the world as well, right? Making sure you're recognizing your own bias, maybe understand if you're placing any stereotypes that may impact the interaction that you're having with the client, being able to self-reflect on what is going on regarding the information that you're now receiving, right? And being sensitive to that. So it's deeper than just learning the information. There's also self-reflection that has to take place. So just being mindful that you have to seek the knowledge, right, about diverse cultures, about history, about traditions and values, beliefs, that may impact clients from diverse backgrounds. So always, always, always keep that in mind. It is so important to approach the situation with cultural humility, and acknowledging that there are absolute limitations that we just have to be aware of in order for us to grow, right? In order for us to better serve these clients that we may not have experience serving in the past. Conflict of interest. A social worker is employed by an agency that receives funding from a pharmaceutical company to promote a new medication. The social worker is asked to provide information and referrals to clients about this medication, even though they have concerns about its effectiveness and potential side effects. The social worker must navigate the conflict of interest between their professional obligations and provide unbiased and evidence-based information to clients and their employer's financial interest. So there's a clear conflict of interest here, as the social worker may not be in the same mindset in regards to promoting this new medication. So what sits well with you, what does not sit well with you, and what next steps would you take? Go ahead and document that in the discussions tab. The NASW Code of Ethics does also address conflicts of interest. So remember, as professionals, we have a duty to act with honesty, to be transparent in all professional relationships, to act with integrity, to avoid conflicts of interest that could compromise professional judgment, right? So making sure that we are understanding that there can be potential conflicts, potential, conflicts within the professional role, whether that's, we talked about like dual relationships, maybe even personal relationships, right? Other factors that can influence that decision making. But this may look a little bit different in regards to like, this is more of like conflict of interest in regards to informed consent. So making sure that, clients have a clear understanding of the impact, that the service can have on them, right? These referrals can have on them. So being clear, right, with any symptoms or precautions that should be taken is absolutely important. Just like a doctor, would disclose and ask if you have any questions about services and medications that are given, right? We have to also give our clients the same opportunity that they deserve to ask those questions and understand the truth in those questions as well. So, self-disclosure. A social worker is facilitating a support group for survivors of trauma. During a session, the social worker shares a personal experience of trauma in an attempt to connect with and validate the experiences of group members. The social worker must consider the appropriateness of self-disclosure, potential impact on the group dynamics, and confidentiality and ethical guidelines regarding maintaining professional boundaries and avoiding harm to clients. So, in this particular situation, a social worker is trying to determine if it's appropriate or not to share a personal experience of trauma as they're working with group members who are survivors of trauma. So, what does that self disclosure look like? As a social worker, how would you proceed when it comes to supporting and empowering these clients? What next steps would you take? Document in the discussions tab. The NASW Code of Ethics does provide guidelines regarding self disclosure. Keeping in mind that professional judgment is very important. Always exercise this and discretion when considering whether to disclose personal information. For example, if a client is asking about your personal life and who you're dating and how many kids you have and how many siblings you have and where they live and all this information, right? You have to deem if that's important to share or not, right? It's also important to consider, what it's like in the therapeutic relationship, right? Self-disclosure should be guided by the best interests of clients and the goals of the therapeutic process. So considering the relevance of self-disclosure, right? Is there a relation to the client's needs? Is there a relation to the client's goals, their therapeutic process? Really think about and selectively and purposefully choose what you're choosing to share with them and how that's building your rapport, how it's building your empathy and your trust to maintain a strong and successful therapeutic relationship. So, keep that in mind as you consider how to answer ethical decisions in regarding this. Now that you've had a chance to review what those ethical scenarios look like, before you answer your questions, take a look at what steps you can take to ensure that you're making the best decision. So, first, determine whether there is an ethical issue or dilemma at hand. Again, if it's giving you that gut feeling that you're really uncertain about what the scenario is, if it's giving you an uncomfy feeling, then you absolutely want to address that. Identifying key values and principles involved, so examining your values. So as you can see with every scenario that I gave you, I also gave you a bolded idea of what this can look like in regarding the NASW Code of Ethics, whether that's a conflict of interest, whether it's a boundary violation, whether it's confidentiality, right? Those are key principles that are in your NASW Code of Ethics, which will help you answer those questions using that guidebook. Identify who could be harmed or help. So in most cases, that's always going to be your client, right? We want to help them. So how can we do that? Also, contacting your supervisor or your colleague. So don't be shy or do not feel embarrassed to lean on somebody else for support and guidance. It is absolutely what is expected of you, really and truly, as a social worker, especially as you are growing in this field. And I'm not even going to say just you, myself as well. I definitely lean on social workers, mentors for support and guidance. I don't know if you guys know, there's a position called an ombudsman. That is kind of the mediator between, for example, my facility and the clients that we are serving, our residents that we have at our facility. So if there's ever an issue or if there's ever an incident that I just do not have enough information on to make the best decision, I'm going to contact the ombudsman. They're going to give me a neutral party response. They're going to maybe give me some options that I have not yet considered to best make the decision to help that client. 5, sorry, the numbers are kind of weird. Develop an action plan that is consistent with ethical priorities that have been determined as central to the dilemma. So now you're brainstorming, right? You have all the ideas, you've heard all the options. Now we're going to make a decision. We're going to figure out how to resolve this issue now that we have everything that's needed, gathering information. Implement your plan utilizing the most appropriate practice skills and competencies. All right, so now we're implementing this plan based off of this knowledge that we've had. So we're seeing if this action step is going to take place and if it's going to work. And then we're going to reflect on the outcome of the ethical decision-making process. So why do we do that? Sometimes we realize, oh, okay, things are going well, let's keep it the same, or we may determine that we need to maybe take it a step further. So this is why we reflect, to make sure that the decision was best for the client and that we are in full support of it and don't have to make any changes. All right, in your textbook, you will see page 151 gives a chart about resolving an ethical dilemma. So this scenario is very simple. We're going to walk through it together really quick so that you understand how we're using the NASW Code of Ethics when making ethical decisions. So at the top, it states, recognize the ethical dilemma. Student is invited by the client to the client's daughter's birthday party and doesn't know if it's appropriate to attend. From there, we have a decision, right? Promote the well-being of the client or prevent multiple or dual relationships. So, both sound like options that we can consider, but let's take a look at what the NASW Code of Ethics says. So to the left, the values here are service, importance of human relationships, and the standard is 1.01, commitment to the client. Okay, let's go to option 2. The values are integrity and competence, and the standard is 1.06, conflicts of interest. C, social workers should not engage in dual or multiple relationships. All right, so as we reflect, what standard wins out and why? Why? All right, the answer is clear and it's right there. Option 2, standard 1.06, preventing multiple or dual relationships. And let's take a look at why. The student determined that the event was social and thus could create a conflict of interest in the form of dual relationship. The obligation to avoid conflicts of interest won out over the obligation to promote the well-being of the client. And to analyze the decision, the student felt she made the correct decision. The client responded well to student explaining the boundaries of the professional relationship, and the student felt would do the same again, given similar circumstances. So I've shared this in class before, but it's important to keep in mind, what is this particular event that I'm attending and how is it helping the client, right? In this situation, we have a birthday party. It's very social, probably, meeting friends and personal people, that you don't know if you are counseling, right? You don't know your relationship with these individuals. So if this was to be a milestone that the student is having, maybe a graduation, right? Maybe a public event that has officials there, whether that's professionals there, maybe something like that. But because this is social, I can absolutely see it not being in the best interest of the client. Just not knowing how that could play out and what your new expectation is moving forward. From here on, are you going to be invited to the birthday party every year? And, what does that look like? So just trying to avoid that from taking place. If you can, at any time, you do have to set that boundary. So there is a role of law in regards to resolving ethical dilemmas. Let's read what it states in the textbook. Legal obligation to report suspected abuse and neglect, prevent harm, or want someone of impeding harm, and report a felony will override other ethical obligations such as confidentiality and the value of human relationships. So as you know, we talk about confidentiality and the intake session with the client, and you absolutely have to share what the limitations to that involve, right? So of course, if there's any abuse, neglect, or harm, on themselves or someone else has to be reported. And that's for the safety of you as well, right? And of course, of others, if that is something that is expressed in a therapy session. And to the right here, I just have always consult your field instructor when dilemmas that involve legal obligation present themselves in practice, because it is so important to make sure that you're not the only ears that are hearing what is being shared with you, and that you can have somebody kind of justify and keep a paper trail of what was said, because whatever is documented, right, that's what's going to best help us when it comes to working with our clients. If you hear that something happened and you reported it, that's justified. But if you hear it and don't document it, that does kind of bring up other issues that could definitely be conflict for you, in your role. So making sure that, especially when it comes to you in practice, that you always include your supervisor, or take next steps to involve, the right party or person in place to really get the help that's needed. Because when you involve the law, or when it's above you or your agency, you really have to make sure that you're following policies. I am going to post the NASW Code of Ethics in Blackboard. Please use this as a reference as you answer your ethical dilemma questions and scenarios so that you have a better idea of how to proceed. All right, so you all can take a look at the SWEEP online assessment project that is in your syllabus. We went through this last week. There are 2 assessments that you guys will be responsible for completing. One, the ADEI assessment, and then also the FCAI knowledge test. So we went through what that looks like. Your email should be sent to you next week, and you guys will have the opportunity to answer 100 questions. I know we talked about last week, Toshia, can you ask Miss Sullivan if there are any way that she can post the answers? I saw Dr. Sullivan and I did not have the opportunity to ask her that. I think I asked her everything else under the sun, but must have missed that one. So stay tuned with the answer from if you guys will be able to get the answer responses. But please know that this is not counted as a grade. We just want to track your knowledge. And hopefully we'll have some time in class next week to review some helpful tips so that you can feel confident as you're answering those questions. Awesome. You guys made it through the end of the PowerPoint video, so that's one thing you can check off your list for this week. In addition to that, you will have to also post 3 discussion posts and 2 responses to peers with those ethical decisions in Blackboard. Also, make sure you input your Tavera hours and your task notes. I'll be going through this afternoon to clear those out and make sure that I'm up to date. Your midterm comments should be in your learning plan by this Friday. Please make sure that you guys are reminding your supervisors to get those done. And also remember that you will have to comment first before your supervisor can enter their comments. And make sure that initialing after your comments are in there so that I know that you are the one who completed it. And as you all know, those sweep surveys, which I talked about, the ADEI, FCI, those will be due next week, Friday. So please keep that in mind as something to do on your to-do list. I know you can't do it until you get it, but just please keep that in mind. If you guys have any questions, reach out to me. I hope you guys have a great week and you guys stay safe.